Hi there, I'm Joyce the Voice, and I am out visiting, and I wanted to show you these giant leaves. Aren't these incredible oak leaves? Like the biggest you've ever seen, biggest I've ever seen. I wouldn't want to rake these babies up, use them as a fan. They're huge. Anyway, I wanted to tell about my experience volunteering on Election Day. Since election integrity is what we're all about, because without our vote being heard, we don't have democracy. We don't have freedom. So anyway, I was a volunteer at the check-in, and it was a very long day. I was asked a couple days before, last minute. I wasn't thinking of working it, but I knew I'd be too tired. But when somebody asked me to step up and volunteer, I'm like, okay, I'll volunteer. And so I wanted to tell you the setup was we were in a firehouse, and there were 3 fire truck bays, and so we had one of them. 2 trucks were in the 2 other bays. So when you enter the door, first thing you enter is with a bay to the when you enter the building to the far left. When you enter, there was the first table, which is the check-in, which is where I sat behind them. I first sat at the end of the table, but because I have my cast on my arm, I needed to rest it on the table. And they said, no, you can't put anything on the table but what the people who were working there are doing. They couldn't even put a water bottle on the table. I mean, that's how strict it was, which I understand completely. You don't want anything spilling or anything like that, of course. Right, so, but I needed an armrest. So they did accommodate me, and they did find me a nice office chair with armrests to rest my arm on, and they sat me behind the table in earshot, like kind of between the 2 people checking in. And then the next table next to us, further down, was the table where they receive the ballots. People receive the ballots, they receive a pen, and then they turn around on the other side of the bay that we were on. They were aligned all of the booths where people fill in the blanks to their ballot. And then, of course, next to the table where they get their ballots was another table where they had people for if there's a conflict or something like that, with the registrar, the election office registrar or whatever people. And they also had people who would fill in for when the check-ins or the other people went on a break, or I had to leave the table for any personal reason, whatnot. Then further down was tables with food, like where people could get food or eat their food. They weren't supposed to eat by the tables where we were working, of course. Tables that were working, that I wasn't working, but I was volunteering at, were covered with plastic party table liners. And then, of course, across from my table, just near the exit door, was the last thing, which was the ballot machine, which you push the paper through. It's an old Scantron machine. So, and then the person sitting there in an office chair also. And that was it. They had signs all over they wanted people to wear masks to vote, which I think is completely not right, but we'll talk further about that. So it was a very long day, like I said. I worked I voted in my own ward first, and then to 8 o'clock at night, and then a few minutes later we went to just make sure that our counting was right. We wanted to hear the tally of who won. So the COVID precautions was, of course, they wanted people to wear a mask. Now, they had a sign on the door, you had to wear a mask, but yet the fire trucks were going in and out during the day, and the firemen weren't wearing masks, and they were all hanging around on the other end of the building and in the garage. And some people did slip through, about 10 of them maybe. I wasn't going to say anything. Some people put their mask on as soon as they got in. And then there was one person who rejected wearing the mask. Right after they came to my table, and then they went to the next table, they just went and filled out their 3 circles, and then they leave, right? So the only place they sprayed down after people left, after voting, was the voting booth. They didn't spray the tables that they came up to approach. Now, they either showed us the ID, it was stuffed in their wallet, and they couldn't get it out, so they held it in front so they can see it. They dropped it on the table, which they were asked to do, or they handed it to them. So not once was the table sprayed down, but they got to keep their pen. They got to get a sticker, and they put their paper in the machine. And the blue paper that was supposed to cover their ballot, they threw in a trash bag next to the machine. So the monitor, the one who ran the election poll where I was, she's a short lady. I thought she had a Napoleon complex. She wasn't friendly. She seemed to be very business-minded, but she was definitely a mask Nazi. She sat at the other ends, though, close to the tables where people ate. And she had her eyes out on the door. And if she caught people without a mask, she'd yell, "Tell them to have to wear a mask." So half the time, when there were people who didn't wear masks, we didn't say anything. But she caught this one guy, and he was the only one, a young man in his 20s. And she ran and she yelled at him, "You can't vote till you have your mask on." "No, I don't want to wear a mask." And she offered masks to people, and they did take masks. So we weren't yelling at them, but she was. And so, and she wanted us to, and I wouldn't comply. First of all, I'm a volunteer, but even the workers, they were like, "That's bullshit. They're only coming in, filling in 3 circles, then leaving," right? So, anyway, so she makes a big deal. So this guy comes in at the table. She doesn't let us take his name or ID. And she gets on the phone. She calls up headquarters, I suppose, the election office. And they said, "Well, you can't stop him from voting. You'll have to do it curbside." So she wants to take him outside to vote. Well, that wasn't going to work because he's like, "No, I'm pushing it through the machine myself." So I was like, "We can't have anybody else in here if you do that." I'm like, "Okay, that's the biggest bullshit I ever saw, right?" So, but there was nobody else voting there. And I told him while he's standing there, she's on the phone, "This whole thing is taking 5 minutes. He would have been out in 50 seconds. But nope. I mean, if anybody gives them a reason to vote Republican, this would be it, right? So I sat there and I looked up and I said, "I'm with you." And I looked over at the other women, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't know. They're just shrugging because they didn't care. They're sick of the mask thing too, no matter who they're voting for. I don't know. I presume they were Democrats because most of the people in the city are." And I said, "Well, look, your right to vote trumps a mandate to wear a mask completely. You cannot, if a person has a civil duty and responsibility and right to vote, you can't trump that with a mask mandate, which is a tyrannical fascist dictate. It's not even voted in by legislation. It's an executive order from who? From a tyrant, because it's not something that's been voted in. They can't vote it in. And a CDC recommendation is not a law. Even though, like, you go on public transportation, they say it's a federal law, a public law. It's not a public law. Give me the PL number. There is no PL number. It's a CDC dictate. And who are they? They're privately funded. They're not a government agency. Oh, they're contracted with the government. Oh, but they got their own. That's a whole nother story. Well, we're not going there. Okay. So this monitor person, the mask Nazi Napoleon complex lady. So I go to the restroom. When I go to the restroom, she's in there before me, and it's a co-ed restroom. It's the only one in the firehouse that I knew of that we had access to anyway. There was paper on the wall for toilet liners. There was sanitation spray, desanitizing, disinfectant spray, and so when I go to sit down, there was pee all over the seat. Piss all over the seat. Now, she left it that way. She came out of the bathroom. She didn't know I was online or waiting for her. There was no line, but she didn't know I was waiting to get in. So this is the person who's ultra paranoid, supposedly, about germs, a germaphobe, And making sure, of course, after everybody votes, like everybody has cooties when they fill out the 3 dots, but they, when they're standing at our tables, we're not spraying anything down. And then she gets all freaky about the mask, but she pisses all over the toilet seat. This is all about control. It's nothing to do with personal hygiene, sanitation, germaphobia, anything like that. I mean, I took a giant wad of toilet paper, wiped that thing down, got it dry, sprayed it with disinfectant, wiped it again, then lined it twice with paper before I could use the bathroom. Not to share my bathroom habits, but I got bad balance. You see my broken bones that I get. So anyway, this is the kind of people we're dealing with. So few did get through, but one refused to wear the mask. Nobody should have had to wear a mask. I didn't even have to wear a mask, but I wore it under my nose most of the time, looking down, working on my puzzle book when there weren't people coming in. I didn't want to get kicked out, or I didn't want to cause any problems because I was there for a different purpose. And so I did what I had to do. I monitored myself. I volunteered to take down numbers of how many people came in to make sure that everything was fine and dandy and everything added up right and everything was good. We'll talk about that in a minute. I did have somebody who was outside come in and offer to buy me Wendy's for lunch. One of the Republicans that were 75 feet from the building on the sidewalk outside of the Firehouse Drive to the left, and then there was others to the right for the Democrats. The Democrats had 2 signs for Justin Elliker between them and the building within 75 feet. They weren't supposed to do that. A Republican person asked the Democrat person if they knew that this signs were there, if they knew that wasn't allowed. They said, I didn't put them there, but the Republican person didn't pull them out. I don't know why. I would have yanked those babies out. Said, here, put them over here. You're not allowed to keep them here by the door. You're supposed to keep a neutral zone. So anybody with any pamphlets that came in that were handed to them, we had to ask them to stuff them in their pockets or throw them in the garbage because it's a neutral zone. And that we made sure that everybody did. So what happened was they were coming in from the Democrats with cards that had exact diagrams of what the ballot looks like with the row that they're supposed to color in down the Democratic line. One Spanish lady came in, or a Latino. She didn't know how to do it. She didn't know how to vote. So the one lady, who's obviously Democrat, said, you see that you just vote down the row. You just pick a row and vote down the row. And then the other person sitting at my table, I know he was, of the other party, and he said, no, you have to pick one person from this category, one person from this category, and one person from this category. And so she was telling how to vote, and he was telling how to properly vote. So what happened was then, so they accommodated me with a good office chair. They didn't accommodate me for lunch, though, because this guy offered me Wendy's. He goes, and 2.5 hours later, I'm like, where's my lunch? I texted, and it's in there. Gave it to some lady, said I couldn't come in without a mask, and took it and put it on the back tables, obviously. Well, he didn't know that they put it on the back tables. He thought they would have given it to me or called me over. People at the table next to me knew I was getting Wendy's. They were laughing about it because they weren't getting anything good. So, they didn't tell me. Nobody told me. He was sitting there for an hour. I had melted ice in my drink. I had cold fries, cold burger. It was nasty. So they accommodated me with the chair, but they did not accommodate me by telling me my lunch was there and it was hot. I mean, I was right by the door, but I didn't see him bringing it. So I think that was really, really rude. When I first walked in the morning, they were snickering and mocking. I don't know if they were laughing at me or laughing at why I was there or what, but they were not polite. They were nicer at the end of the day, a couple of people, but not all of them. I was kind to them through the whole day. I was not polite. And I didn't talk. I just did my job. Only thing we talked about was names that it checked in and making sure numbers were right and everything, whatnot. So there were a number of absentee ballots. I don't know the exact number. I didn't count them up. But what the Democrats did do is they had runners. I hear a woodpecker. I think I hear a woodpecker. There's something chomping out there or making noise. So, so as a woman with dementia that came in, they were runners. And this woman, one of the Democrats ran in and out with people. One person in particular, I remember. She came in and she helped her the whole way to sign in, to show her ID at the table. It was abuse to me. I mean, she's letting this woman demonstrate her rights to vote, but she had dementia. If you don't have children voting under the age of 21 or even 18, I mean, I would think a 15-year-old can make a better decision than this woman she dragged in. And she helped her at the booth fill in the dots, 3 dots. So I'm sure a lot of these absentee ballots are the same kind of ballots, where these are people who have no capacity to actually vote. And then I don't know that there are any laws to stop it either. We don't have them driving on the road, so why are they voting? I mean, I don't know. That's something to think about. Is there a test, that they have? Once person has personal aid and they need to have a lot of assistance, and they can't think for themselves anymore, and they demonstrate that they're unsafe on their own, how can they judge how do they have any kind of judgment, higher thought for political or social issues when they can't even take care of their own butt wiping? Literally, I think of Joe. How can he run this country? Never mind people who vote for people like Joe. I mean, these are the people who vote for people like Joe. People who can't wipe their own butts. That's what it seems like. Because these are the people they're dragging in to the to do voting now, to stuff the ballots. So the other thing is, like I said, they have cards with a diagram of what the ballot should look like after they properly demonstrate, after they, how to print it, color it in to look exactly like the Democratic ballot that they want. And one thing I also didn't notice was a lot of young people. There were a few young people, but not a lot. And I was shocked. There were a lot of parents, because I would think that if they're raising a family, they're concerned about fuel prices, they're concerned about food prices, they're concerned about, schools. And although we didn't have Board of Education election, it has to be a wave. It has to be the whole thing, the whole shebang. And I'm surprised that a lot of people didn't show for that. Or some people did. They did bring their children. But I'm shocked that more red didn't come out and fight for the children, because we know that the blue's doing nothing for the children. And there were, like I said, a number of parents who brought their kids. And I said, that's wonderful. Like, thank you. I used to bring my son to vote with me. And it was always good, demonstration for them to see the democracy. Now, look, we may not be a democracy nationally. We're a democratic republic. But locally, we are a democracy. The Republican lost 2-1, or 1-2. It was 152 in my ward for the Republican and 290 for the Democrat. I don't know how that happened. When I was trying to type profile by looking at the people and figuring out maybe they're Republican, maybe they're Democrat, I didn't know how, to profile and decide how they would judge how they would vote. But I swore it would be closer to, I didn't think the Republican Carlson would win maybe, but I didn't think he'd be that far behind either. But people didn't show up, and I do not know why. Maybe they're disenchanted. But locally, who knows what's going on with these machines too. I have no idea if there's anything going on with these machines. They say that they're old, antiquated kind. They're the old-fashioned Scantron kind, that nothing electronic can be done with them to tamper with them, unless it's built in, and that I would not know. But who knows? I don't know. I can tell you that these absentee ballots, which had nothing to do with the numbers that I just shared, because I didn't count those. I'm just counting the ones of the people who came in. And there were There were 459 that came in. There were, I don't know if there were 100, but there were a number of absentee ballots, though. But that doesn't matter. I mean, if it was a close race, it would have pushed it over, because I'm certain they're all mostly Democrat because of the way that they were bringing in dementia patients and Latino people who didn't know who they were voting for except for the Democratic Party. So anyway, that's just what I had to share. And yeah, I just wanted to share my experience. And yeah, change the way we do things to compete with them. I don't know. I mean, I just think it's really, really wrong. And it's morally and ethically wrong, as much as it may not be legally wrong, what I witnessed them doing. Our numbers added up exactly to how many people came in the building as to how many people voted on the machine. So that wasn't the issue in that regard. They're very basic stuff, you know, but it was the people that they were bringing, that they brought in. They're just, and maybe it wasn't enough to make a difference. Maybe we would have lost anyway, and that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying, because if it was close, it could have been enough to push it over the edge. But it's a practice that they commonly do, and they do it everywhere. And of course, the absentee ballots, that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, and the whole mask thing, telling people they have to wear a mask to vote. What kind of bullshit is that? What kind of tyrants do we have running the the poll? That was nuts. That was totally nuts. Totally uncalled for. And that guy was pissed. He was pissed. I hope he runs for office someday. That would be cool. He'd have some testimony for sure. So, all right. Have a good night.